Good morning, sixth graders. I hope you're excited to start another week of online learning. Today we are digging into chapter 14, doing the first section, which is 14.1. I can explain how to find the square root of a number, and I can ask for help understanding, and I can find square roots. And the most important thing that we're going to be doing today is I can evaluate expressions involving square roots. One thing that you will need is a scientific calculator. If you have a scientific calculator like the ones we used in class, I'll show you exactly how to find the square root using those calculators. If you have an iPhone, I'll show you how to find the square root of those on an iPhone as well. So first up, a little joke for you. I finally found the square root here. That's the square root that some of you might have been thinking about, but that's not exactly what we're going to be finding in class today. So first up, squaring a number and square rooting a number are inverse operations because 4 to the second power, of course, means 4 times 4, which is 16. Well, if I wanted to square root 16, that then would take me back to 4. So squaring a number and square rooting a number, those are inverse operations of each other. Now, I do have this table here that kind of lists all of the different squares and square roots. Now, these ones would all be called perfect squares, and the reason that they're perfect squares is because the square root is a whole number. So you can see all the different perfect squares going from 1 all the way up to 29. So the first one obviously would be 1 because 1 squared is 1, so square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 4 is 2, square root of 9 is 3, square root of 16 is 4, and so on. I can link this into the document if you'd like to have your own copy of it, but most of you are probably just going to want to use mental math, or you can use a calculator. So here's a picture of the calculators that we used in class. Now, how do you find the square root using a calculator? Well, first, you need to push the second key up here. Then you hit this button here, which says x squared. And that second function that you hit then gets you to the one that's above it, the little square root key. Then the number you want the square root of, and then press enter. So to try it out, push the second key, push this button here, which gives you to this one, type in 4, and then hit enter, and it should give you the square root of 2. All right, if you're using a scientific calculator, then this is the key that you want to have. But this one's a little bit different. First, you have to type the number you want the square root of, for example, 4. Then you push this button here, and then the answer should be given to you is 2. So whichever calculator that you use, that you should be able to find the square root. It just takes a little practice of trying it out and finding the correct square root. Now going into your notes packet, example 1 says find the 2 square roots of 64. Well, the 2 square roots of 64 would actually be 8 and negative 8, because 8 to the second power gives me 64, but negative 8 to the second power also gives me 64, because negative 8 times negative 8 is also positive 64. Well, how do we know which square root you want? Well, what they do is put a little symbol in front of the square root symbol. So if there's no symbol in front of the square root, then it's assumed that you want the positive square root. If they put a little minus sign in front of the square root, then that means that you want the negative square root. And if they put a little plus minus sign in the front, then that means that they want both square roots, the positive and the negative. So looking at this example, it says find the square roots. So this one, they want the negative. So the negative square root of 81 would, of course, be negative 9. Now this one's a little bit trickier. 9 and 64 are both perfect squares. So since they're both perfect squares, I can just find the positive and the negative square root of each of those numbers. The square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 64 is 8. So then my square roots would be plus or minus 3/8 for that one. This one just wants the positive because there's no number in front of it. So the square root of 4.84 would be 2.2. Now this one's kind of tricky like this one was. 192 and 3 are not perfect squares. So what you want to do is take 192 divided by 3. And that then gives you 64. So now you want the negative square root of 64, which of course would be negative 8. All right, please try these ones on your own, and then we'll come back and check to see how you did. All right, so checking your answers, the 2 square roots of 36 would of course be 6 and negative 6. The 2 square roots of 100 would be 10 and negative 10. Those 2 square roots of 121 would be 11 and negative 11. All right, now it says find the square root or roots depending on the symbol they have in front of it. So the negative square root of 1 would be negative 1. The positive or negative square root of 4 25ths. Well, both of these are perfect squares. So square root of 4 would be 2, and the square root of 25 would be 5. So it would be plus or minus 2/5. And then the last one wants the positive square root, and the positive square root of 12.25 is 3.5. All right, remembering the order of operations that we talked about. The square root symbol can actually be considered a grouping symbol. So a lot of times we're going to figure out the square root part of it first and then follow the order of operations from there. So looking at example 3 here, it says evaluate each expression. So this is 2 times the square root of 144 minus 30. Well, the first thing I want to figure out is what is the square root of 144? And the square root of 144 is 12. So then it's going to be 2 times 12 minus 30. Well, following the order of operations, I have to do 2 times 12 next, and of course that is 24. Then I do my adding or subtracting from left to right, so it would be 24 minus 30, which is of course negative 6. Okay, second example, it says the square root of 36/4 plus 1/6. Well, 36 and 4 are both perfect squares. So I do the square root of 36, which is 6, and I do the square root of 4, which is 2. Now 6 divided by 2 would just simplify to be 3. So then I'm left with 3 plus 1/6, which of course is just 3 and 1/6. All right, last one here. It says 49 minus the square root of 49 squared. Well, remember how I said that those two things are inverse operations of each other. So if I square root 49, I get 7, but then 7 to the second power would take me back to 49. So this problem is really 49 minus 49, which is 0. All right, you can pause the video and solve these ones on your own if you would like. All right, checking to see how you did on it. So the square root of 25 should be 5. 3 times 5 is 15. So then 12 minus 15 should give you an answer of negative 3. For this one, 28 and 7 are not perfect squares. But if I take 28 divided by 7, that is 4. And 4 is a perfect square, so the square root of 4 then would give me 2. And then that leaves me with 2 plus 2.4, which just gives me an answer of 4.4. And last one here, square root of 4 squared is just going to give me 4. So 15 minus 4 is 11. Example 4 here, it says find the radius of the circle. Well, if you remember back a few chapters, we learned the formula for finding the area of a circle is A equals pi times radius squared. Area equals pi times radius squared. Well, now in this problem, they give me the area of the circle is 50.24 inches squared, but they want us to solve for the radius. So I put 50.24 in for A, and then I have 50.24 equaling pi times radius squared. Well, I remember back that pi is simplified to be 3.14, so I'm going to divide by 3.14 on both sides. 50.24 divided by 3.14 leaves me with 16. And obviously when I do that, that pi and 3.14 is going to cancel and just leave me with r squared. Well, I don't want to know what r squared is, I want to know what r is. So then to undo this squaring, I just have to square root both sides of the number. So the square root of 16 then would be 4, and that is what the radius equals. And then of course I could check my answer by doing 3.14 times 4 squared, and it should take me back to 50.24 as long as you use 3.14 for pi. Okay, the on your own one says the area of the circle is 28.26 square feet. Write and solve an equation to find the radius of the circle. Use 3.14 for pi. So again, I put 28.26 in for area, and that of course equals pi times radius squared. Then just like last time, I want to divide by 3.14 on both sides. That leaves me with 900 equals radius squared. To undo radius squared, I would square root both sides. That leaves me with 30 equals r. So that means that the radius of this circle has to be 30. And I can check it because 30 squared times 3.14 should take me back to 28.26. All right, to get started on your homework assignment together like we normally do in class, I'm going to get started on 1, 2, and 3 with you. So question number 1 says, is 26 a perfect square, and explain? Well, 26 is not a perfect square. If I try typing in the square root of 26 on my calculator, I get a decimal. Now that's okay if you get a decimal, but that just means that it's not a perfect square. Because for a number to be a perfect square, it has to have no decimal part to it. It has to be a whole number. Okay, number 2, can the square of an integer be a negative number? Well, technically, the square of a number can't be negative because a positive times a positive is a positive, and a negative times a negative is also a positive. But that doesn't mean that you can't get negative answers. It just means that technically the square of an integer would not be a negative number. And then number 3, does the square root of 256 represent the positive square root of 256, the negative square root of 256, or both? And what this symbol here means, the positive, because notice how there's no minus, there's no plus or minus in front of it, so it means the positive because it doesn't have a negative or a plus or minus in front of it. So remember, when you're finding square roots, if it has a negative in front of it, then it wants the negative square root. If it has nothing in front of it, that means it wants the positive square root. If it has a plus or minus in front of it, that means that they want the both square roots, the positive and the negative. All right, thanks for watching the video. See you tomorrow.